So our next speaker is Dr. Sangeeta Dasgupta from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. So Dr. Dasgupta is an associate professor at the Center for Historical Studies at JNU, whose work has focused on the history of the Tana Bhagat movement in Eastern India. She has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals such as Modern Asian Studies, Indian Economic and Social History Review, and Studies in History. She has edited, together with Daniel Rycroft, a key volume, The Politics of Belonging in India, Becoming Adivasi, and it was published by Routledge in 2011. The title of Dr. Dasgupta's talk today is Perceptions of Gandhi Among Tana Bhagats of Eastern India. So I invite Dr. Dasgupta to begin her talk. You have 20 minutes and I will send you a reminder after 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. In fact, I'll begin somewhat where the earlier speaker, Beena's, began, which is talking about the very fraught times in which we are living, where very different political organizations are invoking the name of Gandhi for very different purposes. And therefore, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. Thank you very much for organizing this panel. It has a relevance, an extreme relevance in today's situation. Thank you, Nishant, for inviting me to speak on this panel. Thank you to all the organizers. I've learned a lot, and each of these webinars that I come for always enrich me in several ways. The paper that I present today is somewhat different from the other two papers that have been presented. Rather than talking about Gandhi's ideas, what I'm going to talk about is picking up from one of the strands in the question of how is Gandhi's name, why and how is Gandhi's name invoked in contemporary struggles for Adivasi rights. This is a very large question, so I'm going to take you to a much narrower focus, to Jharkhand, Chotanagpur, more in a more narrow focus to Ranchi, Hazaribagh, and Palamau, where the Tana Bhagats even today continue with their movement. The fundamental question which I'm going to try and address today is in what ways do the Tana Bhagats invoke the name of Gandhi? What is the meaning that Gandhi holds for the Tana Bhagats? But to answer this, I'm going to get back to my colonial records. I am a historian, so the colonial records are something that I can't get away from. So I'll talk about how, very briefly introducing you to the Tana Bhagat movement, that more than 100 years ago, in fact, in April 1914, Jatra Orao of Gumla, Ranchi, proclaimed that he had received a divine message from Dharmesh, the god of the Oraos. Jatra was to be a king, and his followers, the Tana Bhagat movement, the Tana Bhagats, were to share his movement, were to share his kingdom. Reciting what he claimed were divinely inspired mantras, Jatra advocated that Orao religion should be freed of evils like ghost finding and exorcism, belief in bhoots, animal sacrifice, consumption of alcohol. From the 1920s, you have fresh injunctions that are issued to the Tanas. Followers were to carry the Congress Chanda, wear khaddar, take vows in Gandhi Maharaj's name. Stories developed around the miraculous powers of Gandhi Baba, his Charkha, and Swaraj. The Tana Bhagats became members of the Congress. They attended its annual sessions, participated in processions and hartals, organized panchayats, supported non-cooperation thanas, spun the Charkha, participated in the no rent campaign. All of this makes them part of Gandhi's non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. I'm still very lucky that the Tana Bhagat movement is still alive. So it's possible for me to track a very long history. Of about 10,000 people, their movement is fractured from within, with various groups articulating their grievances differently and advocating sometimes very diverse paths for their protest. Wearing clothes made of khaddar and with Gandhi topis, they walk in processions down the streets of Ranchi, blowing conch shells. They sit on dharnas and hartals and submit petitions to government officials. For political parties, of course, this is a very numerically insignificant number. And so their demands are occasionally heard, but largely ignored as unpractical, absurd, and out of the realm of judicial and bureaucratic rationality. For the Congress, the Tanas have an iconic status. They symbolize Gandhi's reach and lingering influence on Adivasi minds. And therefore, recognizing the Tana commitment to Gandhi, the Congress has given them a hearing. And over the years, we've got Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi, all communicating with the Tanas. In fact, even if we look at press reports, there seem to be followers of Mahatma Gandhi. That's what brings the Tana Bhagats always into prominence. And on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, for example, in 2013, the Gandhi Darshan and Sriti Samiti in Delhi invited Tana children for a performance. And it is there that if you look at the newspaper reading, the reporting says that for these children, their only festival is Gandhi Jayanti, Independence Day, and Republic Day. So it was essential to make them a part of the celebrations here. But as we sit in this webinar, the Tana Bhagats are preparing to meet at Bishnupur, just a few hours away, to celebrate what for them in their calendar are the most important events of the year, October 1st and October 2nd. While Gandhi Jayanti is officially celebrated in different parts of the country to mark the birth anniversary of Gandhiji, and the day is declared to be a national holiday, in a remote corner of the country and among Orao Adivasis of Jharkhand, there is another way of remembering Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi Baba is a deity included within the pantheon of the deotas. On 1st October every year, Tana Bhagats from Ranchi, Hazaribagh and Palamau assemble at night in the remote village of Chingri in Bishnupur, where Jatra Orao, the first leader of the Tana Bhagats, was born, and where a statue of him was erected in 1989. Clad in white saris or kurtas made of khaddar if they can afford it, of synthetic if they cannot, with Gandhi topis on their heads and wearing a janeu or sacred thread around their neck, they clap their hands as they chant their invocations in obeisance to Jatra and Gandhi. The chants of the mantras and the sound of the conch shells pierce the stillness of the night. The smell of dhoop or incense is overpowering. The smoke makes vision hazy. As the chanting continues, some of the women get possessed. With their heads shaking, they bend before the statue as they continue with their singing. On the following day, the birth anniversary of Gandhi, below the statue of Jatra Bhagat is placed a portrait of Gandhi. Gandhi Baba, deemed to be a powerful deity, is worshipped amid smoke, the smell of incense, the sound of the chanting, and is Jatra Bhagat, the founder of the Tana Bhagat movement, with Gandhi, the father of the nation. It is a symbolic act that entwines the history of the Tana Bhagats with the history of the nation. The date of the birth of Gandhi determines when the Tana Bhagats would pay obeisance to the founder of their faith. Let me show you a few images of the event drawn from my own experiences in 2012-13, where I was a part of these events. I will also show a pamphlet or two to show how the Tana Bhagats invoke Gandhi in the pamphlets that they distribute in the streets of Ranchi. Some of these petitions are preserved by those who are considered to be leaders of the community. It's from them that I've collected these. They talk about promises that have never been fulfilled by the Sarkar. The Sarkar is, of course, very loosely defined. It includes within its ambit the colonial state, the governor in Delhi, or the Bharat Sarkar, the government in Jharkhand, or the Jharkhand Sarkar. It could refer as much to members of the Congress or government officials to whom they submit their petitions. So what I'll do is I'll move to the PowerPoint just to show you a few images, and I'll just speak alongside. This is a typical photograph of the Tana Bhagats. You can see them in their attire, the sari, the white sari, the Gandhi topi, the janeu around their neck. This is what I was talking about, the event on the 1st of October every year, where the Tana Bhagats congregate around the statue of Jatra Bhagat. But this is the statue for you to see. This is what happens on the 2nd of October. Under the statue is a portrait of Gandhi. And it's here that the Tana Bhagats begin to worship the Gandhi Baba, the Gandhi Maharaj. Just to give you an idea of that, as I said, once the prayers are on, women particularly get possessed. And this is an image of one of those moments. And this is a typical pamphlet that is distributed, where you can see the Congress Triranga, you can see the cow, which is invoked, but I'm not going to get into that in this paper. And of course, Gandhiji. So from the images, let me then move to the point that I'm trying to make. Why is it so important for the Tana Bhagats to forge this link with Gandhi? For the Tana Bhagats, in their negotiation with the Sarkar and the Congress, in the articulation of their grievances and demands in changing circumstances, and in their engagements with issues of land rights and the legal structure, Gandhi becomes a central figure. In fact, it is their links with Gandhi that the Tana Bhagats repeatedly emphasize in their pamphlets and petitions, as I just pointed out. Nonviolence is a Gandhian ideal that the Tana Bhagats claim for themselves, which links their past with the present. As a political community that draws upon memories of their past, they claim to be, as followers of Gandhi, worshippers of truth and nonviolence. So a pamphlet issued in 2011, for example, by the Tana Bhagat Sangh Kendriya Committee, Lohardaga, begins with the statement, "May Guru Jatra Tana Bhagat remain immortal, may Mahatma Gandhi remain immortal." Plotted in this representation are concrete historical moments that the Tanas recall. Congress sessions at Gaya, Ramgarh and Lahore, Gandhi's campaign in Chotanagpur, the injustice at the hands of the police, etc. In response to Gandhi's call, the Tana Bhagats claim that they had walked miles to attend Congress meetings and had given up their lands. Proudly would a Tana Bhagat who had participated in the national movement display his free railway pass or a badge indicating that he was a Swatantrata Senani or a freedom fighter. Wearing white khaddar and occasionally the Gandhi topi, he seems ready for a political performance. And in despair will a Tana Bhagat, and here I refer to one of my informants, Kartik Tana Bhagat, who says while implicitly critiquing the Sarkar and pointing to an elderly Tana Bhagat, Swatantrata Senani or freedom fighter, look at him, Didi, is this what he deserves after fighting for the independence of his desh? What is interesting, and this is the point that I'm going to make, is the exclusion of any reference to other histories that project the Tana Bhagats as not having always followed the path of nonviolence. The past is thus carefully crafted. Selected historical events are embellished, others are ignored. Within the constrained space offered to them by the Bharat Sarkar or the Jharkhand Sarkar to express their demands, they exercise their agency by determining which questions to ask and which to exclude, presenting their demands in such a way that their claims to justice cannot be challenged. By underlying their links with the Congress movement and the loss of their land in the service of the nation, the Tana Bhagats did precisely this. Justice was their right. The nation owed it to them in lieu of their sacrifice. And interestingly, when the Bihar government implemented the Bihar Land Revenue Restoration Act in order to try and return some of the lands to the Tana Bhagats who had lost it in the course of the national movement, their report was also issued on 2nd October, the year being 1972. But why is it so important for the Tana Bhagats to invoke Gandhi? What is the point that I'm trying to develop in this paper? It is here that I make the following arguments. A political community needs to understand its past historically, a point made by many in the context of the nation. Drawing upon Shahid Amin's event metaphor memory, I would like to argue that this selective amnesia, and I use the word amnesia from Amin's language, was as much the conscious exercise of subaltern groups, and in this case of the Tana Bhagats, who, building upon a particular representation of their history and erasing others, negotiate with the Sarkar and the Congress. The past therefore becomes a negotiated and reworked resource at the course of shifting configurations of social worlds. It is in this context that Deepesh Chakravarty's discussion of historical wounds becomes relevant. A particular mix of history and memory that is distinct from historical truths, privileging an experiential access to the past. And as all of us are fully aware, representations of history and forms of historical consciousness vary in their possibility for appropriation and scope for symbolic elaboration, in their ability to be relevant across contexts, and in their capacity to capture people's imaginations. My intention, however, is not to argue that the Tanas always willfully reconstructed or selectively appropriated their past. As their movement progressed across diverse locales and different temporal scales, several variants of Tana narratives also emerged. Scattered across Chotanagpur, the Tanas had differential experiential accesses to the past, and therefore the articulation of their memories and their depictions would differ or converge. Figures once important receded from Tana memories. New ones emerged as significant. But some figures, such as Jatra Bhagat and more importantly, Gandhi, remained in Tana memory, though the way they were recalled could and did change in Tana narrations of their history. Around these historical events, however, grew other kinds of stories. Stories which were wondrous and momentous, which we historians tend to relegate to the realm of myth and lore, but for which the Tana Bhagats, these are real. For instance, and I quote from some of these stories, the river Koel flowed with the blood of the martyrs when the British fired upon the Tana Bhagats during their no-rent campaign. When Tana Rishis performed their sacrifices and meditated, from the fire arose the hazy contours of the Triranga, or the Congress flag. The Congress later adopted this flag. Since the Tana Bhagats could not provide Nehru with documents for compensation for the loss of their land, what they gave him was a clod of earth from which sprung a peepal sapling. This, according to them, was evidence of their sacrifice. Some of the Tana Bhagats followed Gandhi's call and left with their families goats and sheep for Lahore in order to attend the Congress sessions, got lost, and never returned to their lands. These facts, unanticipated by the historian, expresses the uneasy echoes of limiting doubts that constrain historians rather than what could be seen as historical certainties. To draw upon the argument of Cohen, the reconstructive work of the historian is in constant tension with two other ways of knowing the past, experience and myth, that in terms of bearing on ordinary human lives are far more pervasive and influential. I come to the conclusion of the paper. I think I'm running out of 20 minutes. The Tana Bhagats are dwindling in number and political standing, but it is their link with Gandhi that makes them important symbols of Adivasi protest in Jharkhand today, demanding as they do for themselves land that they claim that they have lost during their participation in Congress movements, non-cooperation, civil disobedience, quit India. For those who lead their difficult lives in scattered pockets of Jharkhand, it is this link with Gandhi that empowers the community and enables them to negotiate with the state as they talk about promises that were never fulfilled by the Sarkar. For them, on the one hand, Gandhi is a historical figure, a leader of the Congress who led the freedom struggle and outlined for them ideals that they claim to uphold even today. But he is also elevated to the status of a god, a deity in the Tana pantheon of gods, due to his extraordinary powers to deliver divine justice. The Tana Bhagats invoke him, are possessed by him, and sing bhajans in his praise. He is a god who appeared in human form. This, in fact, all of these reflect the ways in which the Tana Bhagats relate to the divine world and to their everyday world. Well, through the twists and turns of a long journey that has spanned over 100 years, the Tana Bhagats continue even today to battle for their rights, expressing enthusiasm, but largely distress. Caught between an almost lost past, a difficult present, and an uncertain future, and finding many of their practices economically unviable to sustain, they ultimately carry on with their belief in the Mahatma. Theirs is a long battle that is being patiently fought, but still remains to be won. Thank you.